The second scenario is a netball scenario. This scenario says, in particular, the goal shooter Sarah in the netball team seems to fail 32% scoring average in league games against Lewis and Varndine, yet in training sessions and other local games, her scoring average is 86%. The college often schedule these crunch games towards the end of the season where many spectators can watch. Interestingly, some of the other players in Sarah's team, such as the centre Rachel, have not been very supportive and don't understand or accept Sarah's poor performance in the crunch games of the league. Sarah is aware of Rachel's attitude towards her, but Rachel just seems to thrive off the atmosphere and the challenge of the tough games and has received player of the game several times. From this scenario, we can see that Sarah suffers from anxiety in these crunch matches. The definition of anxiety is a negative state of worry that often occurs in the absence of real or obvious danger. It's often accompanied by a heightened state of physiological arousal. This definition is from Buckworth and Dishman in 2002. Anxiety can also be described as the negative emotional state which is associated with increased arousal, feelings of apprehension with fear, worry and doubt caused by the situation which are seen as threatening because we can't cope with doubt. Stress is related to the current demands, while anxiety is related to something that may or may not happen. A stress situation is the current demands of the match and the crowd. There are two types of anxiety, trait and state. Trait anxiety is a built-in proneness to worry, which is stable over time. They would become highly aroused quickly and have high levels of state anxiety. However, from the scenario, what we have been told, Sarah has low trait anxiety. As in the majority of the matches, she is fine and doesn't suffer from anxiety. However, state anxiety is something that Sarah suffers from. State anxiety is how someone feels in the moment and is temporary and ever-changing, can either be cognitive or somatic. As we can see from the scenario, Sarah feels anxious whenever taking the shot in the crunch matches against Lewis and Varndine. This would suggest that she has high state anxiety in these two matches, and only these two matches. Therefore, she has high state anxiety. Another type is somatic anxiety. This is the physiological changes to the body that are associated with the symptoms of anxiety, but they are triggered by cognitive anxiety. This relates to your perception of the physiological changes that happen in the body. This could be such as increased heart rate or increased breathing rate. For example, Sarah might be able to detect and have her own perception that she is breathing faster and her heart is beating faster. And in addition to this, she might have increased muscle tension when shooting shots against Lewis and Varndine. The other type of anxiety which I mentioned was cognitive anxiety. This part of anxiety is the thought component of it. It is associated with fear and worry of negative evaluations of performance. The negative expectations and concerns about one's ability to perform and the possible consequences to failure. That was the definition from McNally in 2000. We can link this to the scenario. For example, she believes that her team will judge her if she misses and won't support her or understand her. So she'll have high cognitive anxiety, as she will always think that her teammates are on her back. There are some effects that could occur. For example, they may suffer emotional feelings such as inability to concentrate or worry or negative thoughts. For example, a negative thought could be that she's not good enough for the team and could worry that she could get kicked off. Cognitive anxiety is brought on by stress. So, for example, Sarah may not be able to concentrate when taking the shots during the game as she is stressed and unable to concentrate. Just like stress, there are factors that can affect anxiety. For example, they can be personal, situational. Some personal factors could be such as self-esteem or trait anxiety. For example, She could have low self-esteem when taking the shots, as she is unsure and worried about the consequences of it. Situational factors that affect anxiety could be such as the importance of the game or uncertainty. And again, linking it to the scenario, against the two teams, Varndine and Lewis, she might be uncertain that she'll score the shots, as she knows that her conversion rate is low, but compared to other games they play. So again, her self-esteem might be lower, as there's more pressure to score, and if they miss, it might go down. She might also have somatic anxiety. This relates to your perception of the physiological changes of the body, such as increased breathing rate, muscle tension, or increased anxiety. Therefore, she might believe that it is happening, so she might be more aware. Just like stress, the arousal theories could apply. Similar to Nick, catastrophe theory could also apply to Sarah. This is because during her normal matches, her arousal levels is near the optimal. However, during the crunch matches against Lewis and Varndine, her performance suddenly drops and becomes poorer. This could be because her arousal levels are too high, and then a catastrophe occurs. Similarly, inverted U theory could also apply. And again, as I said before, this is as arousal increases, so does performance. This occurs up to an optimal point. And after that, further increases in arousal will cause performance to gradually decline. This could apply to her, however, it is more likely to be the catastrophe theory, as her performance doesn't gradually decrease, it suddenly decreases. Some evaluations of the inverted U theory are: a positive is that it is accepted for worsened performance if under or over aroused. This is because most people will become worse or better if their performance is too high or too low. However, criticisms are that the optimal arousal may not always occur at the middle point of the graph. As I said before, events that need lower levels of arousal, such as archery, their U shape might be further to the left of the graph, as they'll perform better with lower levels of arousal. And if they need high levels of arousal in events such as powerlifting, the curve might be further to the right, as they'll need higher levels of arousal to perform better. This also leads on to another criticism, where the curve does not explain differences in optimal levels of arousal needed for simple and complex tasks. For example, simple and complex tasks will need different levels of arousal to be performed at their best. And just like the catastrophe theory, does the decline always happen at a gradual pace, whereas the catastrophe theory does suggest that it suddenly drops off. Just like Nick, the drive theory wouldn't apply to Sarah. However, the drive theory in this scenario would apply to Rachel. The earliest drive theory was created by Hull in 1951, and it's the most simplistic explanations of arousal. It proposes there is a linear relationship between the arousal and performance, where as arousal increases, so does performance. However, it was then later developed by Zagonek in 1965. This suggests that the presence of other increases arousal, which brings the dominant response, which is most likely to be performed when it is a simple task. So, for example, if Sarah's been training a new shot in training, during a match, her dominant response, maybe a chest pass, might be more likely to perform. However, it would apply to Rachel, because as it says in the scenario, Rachel just seems to thrive off the atmosphere and challenges through the tough games, and has received plenty of player of the games. This means that her performance is better during the crunch matches, and therefore, as she is more aroused, her performance becomes better. To evaluate this theory, one positive is that it is true for experienced performers, as when they become more aroused, their performance is likely to become better. However, it doesn't suggest that there's an optimal. It's also true for well-learned skills, as where the dominant response is the correct one. and it's also true for simple gross motor skills. However, there are also criticisms. It's poor for inexperienced performers, and it also assumes that low levels of arousal means poor performance. But however, we know from other sports, not in netball, but such as archery, where they need lower levels of arousal to perform better. And another criticism is it is poor for novice performers when the dominant response is the incorrect response. Therefore, it is not accurate for every type of performer. Keeping with Rachel, from the scenario, it also suggests that she has low state and trait anxiety. This is because during the crunch game she doesn't get anxious. This means that she'll have low trait and state anxiety, as she doesn't get anxious like Sarah. Linking this to the arousal theory, as you can see the graph on the bottom, they will need lower levels of arousal to perform better, as it's a simple skill that requires concentration. However, linking this to the scenario, Sarah may have levels of arousal that are too high in the matches, so she is unable to concentrate. However, Rachel is in her optimal zone, so she can keep performing well at a higher level than Sarah. Another type of anxiety that Sarah might suffer from is competitive anxiety. This is how a performer perceives the competitive situations as potentially highly threatening. For example, a definition to continue is a competitive state anxiety usually follows a pattern of subjective feelings of tension and inadequacy, I can't say that word, combined with heightened arousal of the ANS. This definition was from Hackford and Schwarzenegger in 1989. Both elite and average performers will feel anxious during a competition or a performance. However, an elite athlete will know how to control them at the crucial times during the match. There are many factors that could affect Sarah's sporting anxiety. For example, in pre-competition, there could be a fear to fail or a fear of injury, lack of control, unfair refereeing, or an unfamiliar pitch. For example, linking it to the scenario again, Sarah might already know that she struggles during the crunch matches, so she would have a fear to fail during the match. There is also factors that are during the match, for example, such as injury or evaluation of the others. There could be a crowd, opposition, or the environment. So, as the scenario suggests, it says that there are many spectators that can watch. This can then increase her sporting arousal, as the crowd could become a factor and increase her anxiety.